Welcome to Where the Music Never Dies, a space devoted to stories, spirit, legacy of my brother, Joel William Moss, lovingly known by many as Joe-Willy or Jolie. For more than 15 years, podcasting has been my way of connecting with people through storytelling. This time, the storytelling is very personal. I chose this format because I need to walk through my own grief journey. And I know that hearing the memories, reflections, and truths shared by those who knew Joel will help me piece together the full picture of his extraordinary life. As the host, I'm giving myself permission to dive deep. So be prepared. I'm going to ask the questions I never thought I needed to ask, fill in the gaps, and to gather the stories that will carry me forward. Joel was not driven by fame, even though he worked along the side with household names such as Rob Reiner, with whom he collaborated on When Harry Met Sally. To Joel, Rob wasn't a celebrity. He was simply a friend, another human being doing meaningful work. That was Joel's way, rounded, humble, and always focused on the person, not the spotlight. In October, just 1 month after Joel's passing, the city of Saratoga Springs and Cafe Lena honored him with a beautiful celebration of life. The tribute included a vibrant second line parade led by New Orleans musician Glenn David Andrews, a joyful musical farewell that captured Joel's spirit. Cafe Lena, where the music never dies, and the School of Music will continue to grow, evolve, and inspire in Joel's memory. His presence is woven into the fabric of that community, and this series is more of a way of sharing that. So let's begin with story number one. My guest today is Kim Scharnberg. He's an American composer. He's an arranger. He's an orchestrator, a record producer, and conductor. No, not of a train, of music. But more importantly, Kim was Joel's friend. And today we get to hear his Joel. Welcome, Kim.
Thank you so much, Karen. I appreciate it. And this is an honor, and I'm humbled to even say anything about Joel's extraordinary life. And in your opening description, you put your head on the nail on why Joel and I were most likely friends, because we had the same exact viewpoint of famous people, of the talented, incredibly talented people we get to work with and have worked with in our career, and like I always say, are they a nice person? Are they good to work with? Because that's all that really matters. Um, and I think those celebrities also appreciate that. That we're not there to, oh, well, remember when you won the Oscar for this, or you won the Grammy for this, or, you know, um, and we can admire their talent and and all of those things, but we're there usually to help and to bring their projects to life, um, and um, and to share stories later. Joel told so many great stories. And yes, I would. Joel was like the celebrity. I would like, okay, let's get Joel cornered and have him start telling some stories. That was always my favorite part. Like, okay, we're gonna skip all the talk about whatever project we're working on. I'm just gonna get Joel telling stories, especially if it's new people that I brought into a project. I like, you won't believe the stories here, and I'm just gonna get him to tell a few. Um, my history with Joel is maybe slightly unique. I moved to Los Angeles in 1985. Um, I hadn't really done much of anything famous, and I was slowly getting into the recording studios out there and started working on some films as an orchestrator and was a trombone player and was sort of making my way into the scene out there. And I heard about of course I heard about Joel Moss. He was already famous by then. Had already done a zillion things by then, and uh, and so I knew about him, and I didn't actually. This is the best part of the story is I never met him when I lived in Los Angeles, and I tell people I clawed my way to the middle out there, um, and worked at Paramount, which he built. Never, and just heard about him. Never, still, again, didn't actually meet him, and knew all about him. Knew all about the famous people he'd worked with. The Hollywood Bowl Orchestra. I had tons and tons of friends in that orchestra, and Joel's worked with co-producing all those recordings back in the heyday of those things with John Mocheri, and I'd worked with John playing as a trombone player, doing operas in Orange County. So Joel's name was always floating around and always always present, but I never met him because he was famous and very busy. So long story short, I moved. I started getting work to orchestrating Broadway shows, and I moved to Westchester County outside of New York in 1998 to work on my first Broadway show, and had three shows in succession right after that. And one of the projects we actually recorded some of this stuff at Paramount out in LA. And again, I still didn't meet Joel at this point, even though I'd already moved to the East Coast. And and so then I can't remember the exact year, but it was a show called Little Women that our friend and colleague Jason Howland composed the music for. I want to say 2004, 2005. And it was all set. Sutton Foster was starring in it, Maureen McGovern was starring in it, all these incredible people, and the record label that was going to record it was going to do the cast album for this, and they were suggesting possible people. We all had our friends in New York that
Sure.
we've worked on with various things, and they said, well, the guy that we really like to work with is Joel Moss. And I'm thinking, well, no, Joel Moss is in L.A. Must be a different Joel Moss. I just made that assumption right up front. It's like, okay, well, even though it's a name I know, there's must be another Joel Moss who's is doing some recording work in New York or something. Again, I was so focused on the project that I didn't research, didn't ask, didn't okay, what are we doing? When are we doing this? And we said, yeah, sure. If you want to use Joel Moss, that's fine. If you like his work, yeah, why not? Um, and and it actually was the day of the first session that I show up at the studio, and it's Joel Moss in the studio. I'm like, and I was kind of like trying to be cool. I'm like, what are you doing here? Or just like, I mean, I'm like, so you're the Joel Moss who did all this stuff in LA, right? And he said, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. He said, but I've been working on cast albums and I love Broadway. I'm like, really? I mean, like, what's your problem? Like nobody loves Broadway over all the, movies and all this other stuff. He said, "Oh yeah, I really relocated to the East Coast," and he gave me some of the backstory about why he relocated and ended up in Saratoga. And he says, "Yeah, but I take the train in and work on these, sessions." And I couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe it that I was getting to work with Joel Moss, who's done all of this incredible stuff. And we hit it off instantly because, we didn't really even talk about all those huge credits that he had. We were just like, it's like, boy, that person's having a rough day, aren't they? Or one of the musicians or whatever, just kind of doing what we do in recording studios. And then I spent a lot of time with him. When we were mixing the album and doing things. I remember that he had the first Keurig coffee maker in New York.
Of course he did.
Of course he did. And I'm like, what? What is this? Oh, yeah, yeah. He showed me, they were probably, I don't know, $500 or something like that back then. And it's like, really? You just put a pod in, whatever those little cups are and makes coffees. Oh, yeah, yeah. And so, you know, and then we just started working on other various projects together because we had such a good time. Um, of course, he still did all these incredible cast albums with my friends and colleagues. He worked on the beautiful cast album with Jason Howland and Billy J. Stein, and helped put that together. And and again, he was kind of the celebrity in the recording studio because of all the stuff he'd done. So, yes, he had worked with Lin-Manuel on In the Heights and and all this stuff. And but he was the guy who'd done all the big films in LA and then had tons of cast recordings and all this vast amount of knowledge of the recording process. Um, and invariably, you'd hear his story about moving to LA and his uncle giving him a hand, at least opening some doors for him. And everybody, of course, politely knew that the M of A&M was Moss. And, like, oh, wow, what was that like, and he said, well, I still had to earn my way and still had to show that I had talent. And I kind of fell into the recording aspect of stuff. So I'm a huge fan of recording history and just the process and so me asking Joel a zillion questions at dinner was always fun. Um, I brought uh, a charity project to him. Um, he was the perfect guy. Charity means no budget.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Uh, but it was for the Children's Kindness Network, and it was a thing called Moosey's Orchestra Adventure about Moosey the cow, who taught children about kindness. And it was I had done a, symphonic, sort of like Peter and the Wolf thing, where that Moosey gets to meet all these different characters of the orchestra and teach children about instruments of the orchestra and impart kindness. And so I had recorded the Arizona University State, Arizona State, whatever, I can't even remember. And then all of these celebrity voiceovers. And I needed somebody to help put all of it together. I just kind of gathered all of these famous people from all walks of life, from Broadway, from country music, from jazz, um, all different kinds of people, and just grab these little snippets of narration with them. And then the incredible operatic soprano Jessie Norman was the voice of Musi. And I had recorded her at the Copeland House, and I think Joel had helped me guide, about this is what you do, and I was trying again. There was no budget, so I just brought all of the elements to Joel, and he put it together with his partner Charlie Abel at the studios, and and it was just a grand time. He knew exactly what to do. He knew how to put it together. And then I was able to bring other projects to him, um, usually involving acoustic music and orchestral music and crazy projects, and Joel was always down for it. The crazier the better. And then he'd have his own crazy stories. I remember
Oh,
we worked on something where, I know this guy who's a great, Russian accordionist. I'm like, and I'm not even sure if he's Russian or Romanian. It's like he would be perfect for this. I think his English is a little rough, but he would be perfect. You just point at him when you need him to play stuff. And he was this virtuoso accordionist. Like, okay, sounds cool, you know? Um, and we would just trade phone calls, swap stories. I'd always ask him more stories, um, just about the business and about what he was doing. I remember him telling me, and of course you know about this, but I think he had said he had moved to Saratoga and he decided to bake cookies and sell cookies. Uh, and of course, in perfect Joel fashion, it became a huge hit and couldn't keep up with the demand. And it suddenly consumed his life. This expedition of cookie baking, because they were incredible cookies and it exceeded demand. Um, and that those kinds of stories were just so common with Joel. Um, and of course, I would read his New Year's Day uh, email
Yes.
that would I'd have to block out a good half an hour to read his email because it was epic on his summary in poetry of usually the craziness that had happened, people who'd passed, people he'd worked with in the past, uh, and he would share just some little tidbits about, oh, Ray Charles, or
Yeah.
these icons of popular music, and jazz. His connections in jazz with John Clayton. I mean, that's I'd only worked with John Clayton once in Los Angeles, but I was able to go up to him at the celebration in October and say, John, you don't know me, but thanks so much for being here. Joel used to talk about you all the time, and all the Clayton Hamilton recordings, and he said, well, of course I had to be here. I mean, and John lost his house in the fires at the beginning of this
Yes.
last year. He lost all these bases, and John's just such a gentleman, which I can see this is why he and Joel were, brothers on so many ways, in so many ways. And see Mark Shaman there. Again, I've done a few things with Mark. Mark doesn't remember me, which is absolutely fine. Mark is a famous guy, and the fact that Mark came and played, was kind of shy about it all. Was there with his partner Lou, and was sitting there nervously, actually at the next table from me. But like Joel would say, you can look over, but you don't say anything. Um, and and uh, and then Mark went up and performed his tribute to Joel, and um, I got to see Mark afterwards and just thanked him for making the trip, drive up from Manhattan, and
Right.
he wasn't there for the fame. He was there to pay
No.
tribute to, again, you know he was there just to pay tribute and honor him, and then drive the 5 hours home.
Yes,
You know.
absolutely. You know, as you're telling your stories, one of the interesting parts about my brother, and we've talked about this before we went live today, is that as his sister, as part of this family, we really had no idea what he was working on, what awards he was up for, usually until after it happened. And then, very matter of factly, he would tell us. Um, when he was working on City Slickers with Billy Crystal, um, he asked my mother, who was an avid baker, if she would send 5 dozen chocolate chip cookies to him. And so my mother did. Um, my mother had a way of perfecting that Toll House chocolate chip cookie so that it's different from everybody else's. And she sent the cookies, and Joel walked into the studio with them and offered them to Billy. Billy took one bite and said, "These are mine. Nobody else can have them." And for years, my mother would send Billy Crystal chocolate chip cookies. Now, the rest of us knew nothing about this until after my father passed, I believe it was. We got a copy of a Polaroid picture with Billy Crystal holding the chocolate chip cookies. And I realized that Joel was like this because of my parents. My parents didn't flaunt over, "Oh, look who I'm baking cookies for." In fact, after that cookie expedition, my mother started baking cookies for the Detroit Pistons. And
Of course.
yeah, and again, until a cousin mentioned it to me, I said, "You're serious?" And he said, "Yeah, your mom says she has nothing better to do, so she's baking cookies." So I realized that we were very lucky. We were brought up in a way that, yes, I can sit back and I can see the music that you've composed, Kim, and plays that you've been involved in. And from a distance, I can say that is phenomenal. And I know Kim, except I met you a couple of years ago on another podcast. And one of the things I said to Joel afterwards was, he's just the guy next door, but he's got talent and he's using it. And if the rest of us could look at the world that way and get to know people for who they are, I'm grateful that people got to know Joel for who he is. Now, I will say some of his stories sort of changed over the years because he was a storyteller. And so, you know, he didn't start out in the music industry. He was going to be an architect.
Right. Right, exactly. Bucky, his mentor Bucky.
Yep.
Bucky. Oh yeah, Buckminster Fuller. Oh, I've heard of him. Yes.
But then he just gave it up. He didn't even, he had one last paper to complete. It was a 5-year program. And my parents were waiting for the invitation to go to graduation. And next thing they know is he's driving cross country with all of his belongings because he's going to follow his music career. And my father said, excuse me, like, what about architecture? Oh, I gave it up. And that's the only thing that I resent from him because I sort of did the same thing when I went to college. My parents wanted me to be a teacher. I took communications instead. And after I earned my associates, they cut me off. No more college. And I said, why?
Because of Joel.
Oh, go ask Joel. But I can't be mad at him for that because I got to where I am because of some of the things that I saw Joel do. And when he went out to California, he had only his Volkswagen, whatever he could put in it. He got out there, he got robbed right away. And so he ended up with just a car. Yeah. All of his belongings had been taken out of the car. So
wow.
He struggled. But most of us had no idea he was struggling. And I think that was something that you probably saw when he came to New York, because getting reestablished in New York was totally different than what he was doing out in LA. And so I remember some of those trips he took from Saratoga Springs to work on projects that he actually slept on the floor in the studio because hotel rooms were just too expensive.
Well, that's the funny thing about this business, that it's so insular that, here I've been in the, did movies and television out in Los Angeles and recording, and figured, oh, well, that Joel Moss is out there. And so the Broadway world, because we're all working so hard to be the best at, it's like Joel Moss. Oh yeah, he's some other guy, you know?
Yeah.
And so, like you said, he was essentially starting over and had to prove himself, which his personality helped take care of it, and his skill. What a concept. And, but yeah, it was, and, he was humbled, but he took it as a challenge, is what it seemed.
Exactly. Well, I know the day that I contacted him that I wanted to start podcasting. He said to me, do you even know what it is? And truthfully, I didn't. I had heard the concept. My son was doing an internship in college, and he was looking for a local internet radio station. And I said, well, I sort of think it's this. And he goes, well, you better sort of do some research. But I didn't. I just went to the local station where my son was interning and said, I have a concept of storytelling. This is what I would like to do. And they sort of laughed, ha, ha, ha. And they said, okay, Tuesdays at 2:00. I said, who's going to listen on Tuesdays at 2:00? Well, it's on the internet. They can find it any time of day they want. Okay, fine. So I started. And they kept coming to me going, what's your story next week? What are you going to do? And I didn't do any research. I would maybe learn about a Kim Scharnberg and say, okay, I see that you're a composer and do all this. come on my show and we'll just talk. And you would say, okay. And that's all we did. We talked about your stories, how you got them. And I finally then got the confidence, okay, I can do this on my own. And I remember Joel saying to me, you really are my sister. You're not afraid. And I said, what's there to be afraid of? I said, I don't look at my stats. So I may have one listener, I may have thousands, or maybe nobody's listening at all. But I've been able to learn something about somebody. And that is the knowledge that I'm looking for. And I realized when he would tell his stories, and sometimes as they became a little more exaggerated, I realized why. It's the life he was living. Okay. He couldn't tell you the same story the same way, Kim, because you wouldn't be as excited. But if he told it you just a little different the next time, you'd be like, oh. And he wasn't trying to prove anything other than it was his personality. And that's what he showed up every year in that blog. And I will tell you, he must have known something because last year was the first year he didn't put out a blog.
I know. I know. He said it was time to let it go. And, the political climate was probably overwhelming. It couldn't be long enough.
Right, exactly.
But yeah, yeah.
So this year, with not having it, it made it a little bit easier to face the new year. Um, but that's why I decided that the series had to start now. It's a new year. It's for you to go through those memories and hold tight to the good ones. And we're sure in all of his connections, there are some memories that people don't want to remember, and that's life. And it's okay. I can remember him. Well, I don't remember, but I remember the story that I was about 6 months old and he was rocking me in my baby carriage, but rocking me so vigorously that somehow the carriage tipped over and it ripped off all my fingernails. Now, I was a baby, so I don't remember the pain. I don't remember the regrowth, but I do know I have the most frail fingernails of anyone in this world. And it's the only thing I can blame him for. You know?
Oh,
So if that's
oh,
the only thing in his 79 years of life that I can blame him for, um, he was my miracle brother. And I am blessed that I know you and other people who have been part of his life. But before I close this, I know there are a couple of shows the two of you worked on. In the Heights.
actually, I didn't work on In the Heights. I just worked on a project where Lin-Manuel was in the room, but I didn't go up to him and introduce myself. I
Oh,
didn't,
wow. Okay.
yeah,
Um,
but
but that was one of the only plays that he got us tickets for. Now, he used to get tickets for everybody else, cousins, whatever. My husband and I would ask, and he'd go, oh, unless you're coming to Broadway. Well, he got us the tickets for In the Heights. And I had just started wearing hearing aids. And after the first musical encore, I said to my husband, I can't handle this because it sounded so distorted. He said to me, do me a favor, take your hearing aids out. Well, the music was loud enough that I could enjoy it and hear it. But I realized after that music is never going to sound the same to me as it once did. And so, to anyone out there, if you can appreciate music, appreciate it, remember it, those are the memories that I will always have. The songs playing in my head.
well, and it's funny because now that I'm getting older, ha ha ha, uh, I I tell stories. I like to tell stories more often, especially with younger people, and I repeat Joel's stories. I don't always, use his, well, if people can make the connection, because I remember Joel recording Stewart.
Oh,
He has this incredible stories about recording Rod Stewart and coaching him on his vocals. And and just totally crazy and ridiculous. I won't give it details, even though I could, and nobody will care because. But it's just and he had so many other incredible stories. And especially if, like I said, if I was bringing other people's projects in, younger people. And it's like, Joel, tell them the story about this and this and this, or I'd prompt him, and he would
yeah.
always deliver. And one of the important things I wanted to say in this interview is how much he cared about his family and talked about his family. Um, he talked about you. He connected me with your brother Gary out in. I probably just mentioned that I had this gig I do out in Laguna Beach, California. He's like, "Wow, my brother lives right there," and he was master Scrabble uh, guru, and he goes
Yep.
all around, and I'm like, "What?" And he said, "Oh yeah, you have to connect with him. He's a genius and the nicest guy." And so, I met Gary at the beach in Laguna Beach, California. And it was just, but that's what Joel cared about. He cared about his family. I mean, please correct me if I'm wrong, but he would call his mother, your mother, like either every weekend or every day. It was part of,
So the interesting part was he called her every single morning.
that's right.
And my son, my youngest son, when he moved away, he started the same thing with me. He said, if Uncle Joel did this, I'm going to do this. And there are some mornings I wish he wouldn't call me because he's yelling at the traffic as he's driving. But Joel would do the same thing with my mother.
Right.
And um, it used to make me feel a little guilty. I will tell you that he called her every day. But for those of you listening, you have to understand that even though Joel could be having a conversation with you, if you were saying something that he didn't like, he let it just go over his head. Whereas me, if I'm having a conversation with you and you say something you don't like, I don't like, it's it gets to me. So my mother was a very typical little old Jewish lady that always had to dig it in. And so I couldn't call her every day, but I respect Joel for doing it. And
Well, and he'd make it a priority. I almost didn't want to say it was every day because that seems
yeah,
so over the top. I thought, well, maybe it was just every, but I remember, we'd be working together. He's like, "Hey, I gotta go call my mom," or I'm scheduled to talk to my mom, or whatever. I'm like, wow, who does that? But it was really important to him, just to stay connected and and this, I worked on some charity project, at least one charity project with Joel, where I think we had to get somebody who sounded like Frank Sinatra and do an arrangement of something. And I wish I could remember what the charity was, but it was somebody who would give these like outrageous like music boxes,
oh yes,
like
yeah.
yeah, like 100 of them to these people. And Joel, like, oh yeah, we're gonna get Bette Midler to sing on this. It's like, oh no, it costs $1 million. Okay, good. We'll get Bette Midler to sing on it, and she sings on it, and then it's part of this music box. And I'm just like, what? And so our thing was we did a Frank Sinatra, copy of something, and with changed lyrics that this benefactor would and Joel would work on it with him, and just it's like, man, that's a crazy gig, and that was normal for Joel. It was always, well, and. And the other people that he worked with. He'd tell me about every project. He was always excited, especially about new projects and young people, that he's like, "Oh, you have to hear this girl." And I was so, is it Ariana?
Yes.
Um, yeah, I remember him, and I was so happy to meet her at the celebration and to go up to her. I mean, she was nervous because she doesn't do this anymore. But I just went up to her. I said, "Hey, I wanted to thank you for playing." I said, "Because Joel talked about you for years and years and years, and about your dad, and and just all the songs that you wrote." And she was genuinely like you know so happy to hear that. And she said, "Well, I'm a mom now," and I'm like, "Joel, nobody cares." I mean, I didn't say that. It's like it's just about you know that you brought this music into the world, and hey, you're still really young, and you never know where this is going to go. You never know where life is going to go. Joel's a great example of that. Who would have guessed that he would have ended up in Saratoga Springs and doing Cafe Lean? I remember when he told me about that he was going to do this. I'm like, huh? And then COVID hit, and he was still doing all these things, and I had all these friends who were showing up and performing there because he made it this incredible, incredible situation. I'm like, you're doing what? You're doing live sound and videos? What? You're putting it what? you know, oh yeah, this is a historic place and we have to do this. I'm like, okay,
And Cafe Lena really was an infusion of new blood into his life and gave
yeah,
him a purpose beyond what he ever thought it would be. Um, and the interesting part is the day before he passed, he was actually working with I think they're called the Pebbles, a youth,
yes,
a youth group
yep,
that performs in Saratoga Springs. And they performed at his celebration of life.
yep, I was there, yeah,
And Joel believed in providing music for everyone. And um, he helped my son. Um, he did draw him away from making it his career. I will tell you, Joel was very adamant that enjoy what you do, but please, especially in today's day and age, have a have a solid career. And at first, my son Alex was very upset with his uncle. How dare you? You have the connections. You can do this. You have recorded me. And he finally understood. You know what? I wouldn't love writing. I wouldn't love performing if I did it 24/7. And what he loves is working in sports, coming up with ideas, and just being part of life. That's the legacy that Joel gave all of us. Live your
and
life.
and Joel also had a conversation. I think it was a Zoom call, or it might have been Skype. It might have even been pre-Zoom with my son when he was really struggling with a lot of things, and Joel just, I said, "Oh, you can talk to Joel. Joel's been through a bunch of stuff too, and just to talk to him." And Joel was just very kind and firm, and he said, "You'll find your way. Humans are resilient. I have my own way of doing it, but that's not everybody's way. And there's a lot of people out there that can help you." And this is before my son had decided to go into music and move to Los Angeles and be a music producer and all that. But my son never forgot that. I mean, when Joel passed, he he called me up and said, he's like, it was, how unexpected it was, and he just, said that Zoom call that one time with Joel was so meaningful. And we always said, "Oh yeah, we're going to come up and we'll get together," and we never did. That's the other side of life. And actually, that brings me back to about Cafe Lena. I was determined to drive up when Doc Severinsen played there,
Oh yes.
and there was one ticket left, and I just couldn't make it happen. I couldn't make it happen. I'd worked a couple of times with Doc back in the olden days. And I just wanted to, show up, especially at Cafe Lena, and I didn't make it. And I told Joel, like, man, I just really wish I could have been there. And he said, oh yeah, you missed it, So, oh,
Yeah,
Karen, I could go on and on and on. I mean, I know it's incredibly hard for you, you know, family loss. Um, but his joy for music lives on. It just does, and you know this, and that's what I love to remember about people who've passed. I had several friends who passed this last year at various ages. And I know Joel worked with a bunch of them, and that they all have this drive of creating and the love of creating, and the stupid parts of the music business that we can all complain about it and laugh at, and like, can you believe they did this? And it's like, oh, what are we going to do, quit? you
yeah,
know I mean, so he's, that's what he passed on to all of us, and what I hope to pass on to is just the joy and the love of doing what we do. It's not for the fame, it's not for the money, it's for the connection to people, and to do what we love doing, and see if we can have a good time doing it with all
abs-
those people.
absolutely. Well, I want to thank you for sharing your stories with us. And I'm sure as listeners, tune in and see all the different stories that we're going to be sharing, just so that everyone knows, I realized that Joel had a mission for me. Didn't realize what that mission was. Um, but when our mother was dying and the two of us were spending the last 2.5 months with her, Joel saw me as an adult, not just as his sister. And that's when my podcasting was just really getting ready. And 2 years ago, I started a podcast on grieving. And he said to me, why are you doing this? And I said, because I still haven't grieved for mom. And I've got to find a way to honor her, but also honor myself. Yesterday, as I was preparing for today, I realized that I'm taking my life coaching to a new place. And that is tell your stories on grieving, tell your memories, because in just this 45 minutes, I have a comfort regarding my brother and regarding my parents because they were part of his life. So, whatever you can get out of this, if it can make your life just a little bit better, you've come a long way. So,
Absolutely.
thank you so very much. What are
Thank
you
you,
working?
Karen.
But tell me, what are you working on now? Anything that we should be listening for on Broadway?
Nothing for broad. Well, actually, I worked on Great Gatsby, which has been very successful. Worked with Jason Holland, that they did beautiful together, and it's a lot of the same team. Great Gatsby's going out on a national tour. I co-orchestrated it with Jason. It's just so much fun to work on. One of the projects that I know Joel would love is I wrote a jazz ballet, um, and it's a story about a little hummingbird who is going to put out a forest fire by bringing one beak of water. It's a parable, a South American parable, bringing one beak of water and putting it on the fire in the Amazon forest at a time all the other animals are making fun of it. And I created this half an hour ballet that I'm going to do the local ballet company and great local jazz musicians, also some from New York. And I know Joel would love this project. And so it's just, and it's a conservatory. So from little kids like 5 years, I left a point where all the 5-year-olds can run out and be herded like kittens,
Mhm.
and up through college age, cusp of being pros, people. So, and just all kinds of stuff for the Vienna Symphony. just all just doing it,
Just
doing it
doing it.
all.
I
Yeah.
love it. Well, please stay in touch with us. And if you come up with another story, send it my way because, you know, he meant a lot to his family, but to all the people he touched.
Thank you. Last thing, I have these headphones, Grado headphones, due to Joel. He made us buy them. They're really expensive, for mixing a project. He said, "This is what I'm listening to. This is what you guys need to listen to as well." So we're all on the same page. I don't want these like noise cancellation headphones making judgment calls about the music. He said, so the Grado headphones.
We'll have to remember that. Maybe we
That's
should get
right.
them as a sponsor.
Tell me about it. They would actually, I don't even, who knows if they know the story. They got all this weird traffic from some guy who insisted, you know.
I love it.
Thank
Thank,
you, Karen.
thank you and Happy New Year.
You
Take
too.
care now.
Take care. See
Bye
ya.
bye.
Bye bye.